Hi, I'm Ashley with Campbell. Thanks for investing your time to help your community be a great place to live. Before you watch the video, make sure to click the subscribe button so that we can help you make educated decisions as a board member.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Tiernan. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Campbell and one of the 5 owners of the company. I'm also a licensed CAM, and I work closely with many of the association clients that we have on specific issues that arise from time to time. For those that that are not familiar with Campbell, we've been in business since 1953, and we manage over 400 HOA and condo association clients from Dade County to the Treasure Coast. We're exclusively in the Southeast Florida. That's all of our businesses here, and that's very purposeful. And we're also proud to be South Florida's highest rated property management company. Our topic today is the 7 habits of highly successful board members. Our hope is that if you'll practice these 7 habits we share with you, you'll be very successful in your role as a board member, whether you're new or you've been doing this for a while. So unfortunately, you guys have a tough job ahead of you. And board members for condos and HOAs don't have the best reputation necessarily. And this short ad from Geico kind of highlights that.
Oh, we love our new home. Neighborhood's great.
Amazing school district. The HOA has been very involved.
These shrubs aren't board approved. You need to break down your cardboard.
Thank you.
Violation. Violation.
I see you've met Cynthia.
At least Geico makes bundling our home and car insurance easy.
And does help us save a bunch of money.
2 inches over regulation.
Thanks, Cynthia. Oh, we love our new home. Neighborhood's great.
Amazing school district. The HOA has been
Sorry
very
about that.
involved.
Let it run on a little too long. So the key here is we don't want you to become the next Cynthia. So nobody wants to be like Cynthia, hopefully. And some of you may have joined the board because you were not happy with how former board members behaved, or you were worried that Cynthia might actually get on the board if you didn't get on the board. So first of all, let's talk about the things we want to make sure you don't do. And these are some of the worst behaviors that Cynthia has, as you've seen here. First of all, she makes decisions based on her personal interest, not for what's in the best interest of the community. So the people want to have a pickleball court. She says, I don't play pickleball. I don't care. We're not doing it. If anyone disagrees with her, she ignores them or attacks them. Number 3, she doesn't make smart financial decisions and wastes a lot of money because she thinks through too short term. Number 4, she micromanages the manager and all the staff, constantly creating confusion for all the people that are trying to work at the property. She's secretive and makes decisions behind closed doors. Number 6, she breaks the rules, and she makes accommodations for people that are her friends that break the rules, and doesn't find those people and doesn't make sure those things get addressed. And number 7, she's just mean and nasty, as you see here, to owners and other board members. So if you recognize any of these behaviors and want to make sure you don't repeat the same mistakes, the next 15, 20 minutes here is going to be really useful. So you joined the board because you believed you would be a great board member, and that you would help, as a volunteer, and try to make your home a great place to live. So here are 7 things that, based on our experience of working with a lot of really good board members and some bad board members, 7 things you can do to focus on during your tenure to make sure everything goes well. Number 1, put community interests first. Number 2, seek consensus among your board members. Number 3, invest in your community. Number 4, trust your manager. Number 5, over communicate. Make sure you're transparent. Number 6, play by the rules, which means you understand your governing docs and the rules of the state of Florida, and that you don't do anything that's going to cause people to be concerned. And number 7, just remember this is your home and try to be a good neighbor. So before we get into those in more detail, I want to acknowledge one real and significant challenge you have to deal with regard to this board that you're on. Every owner and every board member has different values and different goals, whether they're financial goals, social goals, recreation goals, safety goals, and so on. So, and the hardest part of being a board member is understanding and respecting the differences of opinions among your other owners and your other board members. Unfortunately, they won't all share your ideas of what the priorities for the community ought to be. So understanding, what is best for the community is a lot easier with newer communities because all the homeowners are sold on a lifestyle and experience that the developer is promoting. But over time, owners' wants and needs evolve, and eventually you end up with a community that is divided three ways. Number one, you'll have people that want to just retain the status quo, which is the moderate group, the main group. Some start, leaning towards spending no money for their own personal reasons. And then you've got others that, want to spend lavishly to keep up with the newer communities. This challenge has a huge impact on the first three habits that we're going to talk about. And also wanted to make sure I brought this up because it's a recurring theme and why these habits are so important, because this is very different than other boards you might have served upon where there's a real clear mission and goal. A lot of people end up having very different ideas depending on where they're at in their life and what their interests happen to be. So on to the first habit, which is put community interests first. So as a board member, you have a responsibility to look out for what's best for the community, not just what's best for yourself. And as I talked about just a minute ago, this can vary, can differ greatly by community and by personal people's opinions. But, regardless of the community, you have to remember you have a duty to maintain the property values of the community. And that's a real good way to think about it. If you can help make sure that you're retaining the value of the property from a value standpoint, you're likely making the right steps. So this means keeping up the physical property and changing with the times to make sure a community appeals to new buyers. So if you've got outdated color schemes and decor in your common area, or maybe an outdated looking monument and entryway that you might need to consider, that's something that you might need to invest in, although there might not be an immediate appearance that it might add value. So in the end, you've got to think of it from it, and what's best for the community. So regardless of what you think, converting a tennis court to a pickleball court might not have any interest to you at all, but it could absolutely be a great amenity for new owners that might drive sales. Adding charging stations for electric vehicles only benefits a small number of owners today, but it could impact property values over time and be something that would be a selling point again. Upgrading entrances and monuments to communities is almost always purely aesthetic, but it has an absolute impact on home values, which again is something that's super important for you to make sure you remember. So these are just a few examples, and there are many, many more, but it's super important that you remember you have a fiduciary responsibility to do what's right for your community, not just what is in your personal best interest. So number two is seek consensus. So the best board members are experts at rallying supports and knowing how a vote is going to go before the board meeting even starts. Well, how do they do this? Even when board members don't necessarily agree on priorities, number one, they listen to fellow board members, even if they don't agree, and they try to understand if maybe they can adjust their approach a little bit more or come up with some kind of compromise. Incorporate their ideas in and make them feel like they're being heard, your fellow board members. And the key is doing this all before board meetings with one-on-one conversations, which is perfectly legal. You can have one-on-one conversations, and you can also share things via email. You can't make final decisions and or have a quorum of your board involved, but you can have these one-on-one conversations to try to make sure everyone's situation is understood, so that what you're really looking for is you want to have a unanimous vote on key items at the board meeting. It looks a lot better, and if people make compromises to get that, that's fine. But it's a much better look, and it makes things run much smoother when you have the entire board voting together on key actions that need to happen. So number three is investing in your community. So remember, the key way to think about this is that you as a board member, have a duty to maintain the property values of the community. This means investing in the common areas and potentially making capital improvements. So your reserve funds are saved to be spent. Hoarding cash on your balance sheet might look good from a financial perspective, but not when the common elements are deteriorating or appear substantially dated. So one of the key things you can do to try to make sure you invest properly is get a professional reserve study and use that as a guide to formulate a 3 to 5 year plan on how you're going to fund key projects. And this is a perpetual plan that you'll update every year. So don't stick your head in the sand on large capital expenditures, because property values can decline rapidly if the physical infrastructure is unsightly or failing. So it's okay if maintenance goes up a little bit every year. You just have to accept that. And in the end, the best way to look at it, you are a homeowner, but now you also need to look at it almost as like an investor would look at it, because that's the way, when you look across the board for the whole community, that's the way you need to think about it. And unfortunately, you're going to need to be investing, more in your community over the next few years, primarily due to inflation. And, this is, and some of the law changes as well that are impacting condos, but this is going to be absolutely essential that you do this. So the earlier you can get your head around what those fees are going to be, the better off you're going to be. So number 4 is to trust your manager. So, if you can't trust your manager, you probably have the wrong manager. So, property managers are licensed professionals, typically with years of experience in their field, and it's important to let them do their job. So good managers, and really any good employee, doesn't want to be micromanaged. The board has the ultimate decision-making authority, but should try to avoid getting involved in the day-to-day details of the operation of the association. So if you have board members that are sitting in the office for hours at a time, discussing in detail exactly what the manager's doing, or asking to read and critique every email before it goes out, then you have to really ask yourself, where does the problem lie? Because if the manager can't be trusted, it's probably time to look for a new manager. But if the manager is competent, then the solution is to give them some breathing room to do their job. And they'll get more done with people not sitting in their office, and, be able to get things done effectively. And they'll be much happier for it. So the flip side of this is also to not assume managers are experts in every field of property management. So you need to make sure you respect a manager who recommends bringing in outside professionals on large projects, like maybe an engineer or a paving or roofing job, or a legal counsel on a thorny issue. So it's very important to bring in the experts when you need to, because it could save tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars down the line if you make a mistake. So number 5 is over communicate. So the number one complaint I hear from frustrated owners that end up running for the board is lack of transparency. Another way of just saying poor communication. So you need to make sure you communicate early and often. If we're talking about the need to raise maintenance due to inflation, this is something that you need to be talking about early. And making sure that people have time to get prepared for it. If there's a big special assessment that's coming up, kind of let them know what's happening with that. And a lot of you I know have been hit really bad with major insurance increases. So just letting people know that ahead of time. So, one thing that I do want to make sure that you don't overdo, though, is board meeting minutes. So sometimes people come in and feel like they want to put everything in there, like a complete transcript, what happened in the meeting in the board minutes, but that's not the point of the board minutes. And there's a bunch of legal reasons why you don't want to do that. I can point you to a blog post here in just a minute that'll explain it in more detail, but there are much better ways to do it than the minutes, because your minutes need to be very brief. So some ways you can do it are via monthly newsletters, managers reports, community email blasts about important events, just letting people know when, even things just like letting them know when the pest control company is coming in, or when the lawn's going to be done, and these kind of things. Putting out things like an annual State of the Union letter or email summarizing the progress the board's made, town hall meetings for large projects or complex issues. Like, for example, if you're going to be changing your cable provider, bring your cable consultant or your new cable provider in to answer the questions. If you're going to remodel your clubhouse, bring in the decorator, architect, and general contractor to explain the plans and the design ideas. You don't want to be trying to answer the questions that the experts are really better capable of responding to. And if you're not doing, and I'm sure most of you have done virtual meetings and some hybrid meetings, just make sure that you have got the right technology to do that. Being open and honest with your owners is great, and just figure out what works best for your board and stick with it on a regular basis as far as your communication. So I mentioned not being overly detailed on your minutes. So if you want to learn more about that, go to our blog at readfan.org and type in meeting minutes, and you will you'll see a type meeting minutes in here, and then it'll bring up this blog on guidelines for HOAs and condos, and it has a detailed explanation, and it also has a link to an article that is written by an attorney that explains it in much greater detail of why you don't want to have detailed minutes that are like transcripts for what everyone said. So number 6 is playing by the rules. So as a board member, you have the responsibility to understand the laws of the state of Florida, which you can get with your board certification course, and then also making sure that you understand the specific rules and regulations of your own community. So, the Florida law sits above your governing documents, which are your declaration, articles, incorporations, and bylaws, and then the rules and regs. And they're in the sequence on here. I always try to remember DAB, an easy thing to remember, DAB, declaration, articles, bylaws are in that sequence of importance. So it's essential that you understand these, and you will absolutely lose your credibility if you don't follow the rules, or if you ignore someone that's not following the rules, and it appears like you're playing favorites or not treating everybody the same. So this is super important that you're mindful of that, and that you never put yourself in a situation where people think that you're being unfair. And the last one here, Mr. Roberts neighborhood here, be a good neighbor. This is the most important thing. You're a board member, but you're also everyone's neighbor. And it's easy to develop an us versus them attitude when you're sitting on the board, especially when a group of owners are picking at your every move. But you remember, you all live in the same community, and what benefits the community is good for everybody. So, maybe that you need to have a simple phone call or have a cup of coffee with somebody to try to bring things down. You need to think of yourself. I always tell people, think of yourself as a filter, not an amplifier. So when people get upset, you don't want to try to come back at them and yell them down. So also stay off things like Nextdoor or Facebook. Don't let a small minority on social media drive your agenda or drag you down. The better way to deal with that is to do that over communication we talked about earlier with newsletters and your own emails on a regular basis, so that people will know that they can gravitate towards the official line of communication, which is yours, which is prompt, and it's meaningful, and it's timely, and that'll be much more effective. And then finally, if you want to make one thing you can also do for your board is, and potentially even committees, is use a code of conduct. Again, on readfan.org, you can find this example. It's a blog post and has an example and kind of describes how you build out a code of conduct. And the idea here is that everyone that signs up to be on the board or gets voted into the board or becomes a committee member would need to sign this code of conduct, which is basically saying you're going to do what's best for the community and act professionally through the whole process. So in summary, if you practice these habits, put your community interests first, seek consensus, invest in your community, trust your manager, over communicate, play by the rules and be a good neighbor, then you will be successful in your role as a property manager. So with that, I think I might have a few questions here, but I think Ashley also wants to run a poll. And I'll let her do that now, and I'll see if there's any questions that I can answer on here. Let's see. Somebody says, community complains that we seem to have already discussed and they don't get to hear it if we don't discuss at a board meeting. So that's a great question, Tony. So the key thing is you are going to have to discuss things beforehand to make sure that you have a consensus, you've ironed things out, and you can't have 30-minute conversations on every single topic in public. But the key there is to make sure that you explain the key things you compromised on and why you think this is, a good thing. Don't just say, oh, we're going to hire so-and-so for the painting job for $700,000 and then just say it out loud, say it. If you have that process, if you had maybe had bids, you should explain that here's who the 3 bidders are. This is how much each one we charge, each one was going to cost. And then here's why we discussed all this. And here's why we think this is the best one. It happens to be the middle bid for these reasons. Don't just, if you give them a synopsis of what you discussed so that you become a little bit more transparent. But you need to have those discussions before the hand so that you can try to get to a consensus and not do it in public. I know if a majority of our condo board meets, it becomes a public meeting. So how boards discuss investment opportunities, contracts, or problems before you get. So like I said before, you can have one-on-one conversations and you can send email information around and get feedback. You just can't vote, but you can absolutely do email discussions, and you can get together in groups that don't establish a quorum. And it's not terribly difficult to work around that unless you have a board of 3, then it can be problematic. How about a seminar for homeowners that do nothing but criticize the board and amenity providers? That would be interesting. Unfortunately, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'll tell you that in my experience, about 2% of the owners in every property are just never going to be satisfied regardless of anything. And we sometimes call them recreational dissidents. They just like to be complainers. So I'm not sure there's anything you can do to handle that. The best thing you can do is get everyone else, explain to everyone else all your accomplishments in public via newsletters or at a meeting or at a town hall so that everyone else is on your side. And those positive people will drown out the people that are negative and don't appreciate what you do, because that's one of the worst things about this business is how much disrespect there is for, you board members that work so hard to make your homes a great place to work. So methods and suggestions to be able to obtain a membership quorum to change outdated declarations, bylaws, etc. Yeah, that's Ray's question. I'll say there. The simple answer to that is twofold. One is if you want to get a quorum, you need, or to get, majority vote to change things. It requires a lot of dedicated volunteers that will go around and divide the community up and attack it and just try to get consensus. But I'll tell you, one other thing that really helps is electronic voting. So if you haven't considered electronic voting, we've had a great success with that. It's a lot easier for people to do that. But in the end, still, you need people pushing and trying to gain some consensus among the owners to make these things happen. But electronic voting is a huge asset as well. Let's see. So someone said town halls and face-to-face board meetings have been stopped due to owners taking over a meeting and not allowing civil discussions. Help here, please. Yeah, so this one's pretty basic, is that you need to explain the rules of the meeting before the meeting starts. And, if you need to bring a police officer in, we've even done that before, to have people removed from the meeting if they're not following the rules. Or if you need to just adjourn the meeting during the course of the meeting because people are being disruptive. Typically I've seen, if you explain it effectively and if you're doing the right things, the crowd will shout down the people that are being disruptive and it'll take care of itself. But you just got to make sure you plan well, explain what the rules of the meeting are and who can talk when before it starts, and have some extra help there. In the worst case scenario, some law enforcement, that might help. So here's a nice challenge from Ashley Mendoza. What if you have a major project that needs to be done, but don't have the money and your community will go crazy over a special assessment? What do you do? So I think you do what you have to do. This is the whole point of Surfside, is you can't kick these things down the road. You need to figure out what the cost is going to be as early as you can. Bring in the experts to explain it, including, you could even bring in like a city person that explains why the code is the code, and then the engineer that explains why you have to do this, and the contractor explains how it all works and why you have to do it, and how your building may not, your community may not be safe otherwise, and do it in as far advance as possible, and think through all the questions they might have about how are we going to pay for this? Are you going to be able to get a loan for it to be able to make it so that owners can have a longer payout term? You know, just think through all the options and all the challenges, and bring in as many experts as you can in advance. Your property management company should be able to help you with that. But this is something a lot of people are facing, but it's you know, it's something you just have to step up and do. Let's see. Someone asked, what do you think of board members having to sign a non-disclosure agreement? Never heard of that. I have no idea why anyone would ever do that, other than if it were for a like some kind of legal lawsuit or something. But generically, I can't understand why that anyone would have to do that. So regarding transparency, Barb, David, Holden, are hearings conducted by compliance and finding committee open to members, or is it closed between the committee and the owner? Absolutely open. They have to be open. The finding committees are open to all owners. Anyone can go in and observe and listen. So how to handle former treasurer micromanaging with unlimited questions on every detail of financial reports. The best way to handle that would be to have the former treasurer ask questions offline and not in a board meeting, because that's not, or if it's not on the agenda, it's just not on the agenda. So they can't, but you know, don't shut them out. Let them ask them offline. But it's a waste of everyone's time to have going through these kind of details in front of people, despite what that person thinks about it. How do you handle a board member who works against the board? Connie asked that question. That's an interesting question, because you can actually, you know, that can be a problem. Sometimes you just have to accept the fact that you've got a split board. And you know, I believe we actually have a blog post on how to deal with people on split boards on readfan.org. You know, the key thing is you have to share everything with them, but you don't need to have one-off conversations with them. If you accept that they're not going to be on board with what you're going to do, and there's no way to get them on to be reasonable, then you know, just accept how you're going to manage the discussion. When people are you can do things like calling the question to try to which means let's vote on this now, so that the person doesn't keep just belaboring it on and accepting it. If you've got a 5-person board and this is the outlier, that all your votes are going to be 4-1. You know, there's ways you can kind of manage your meetings to handle that and just accept it, because sometimes it can't be overcome, but it's always worth trying first, because you can explain to the person, this is what, I hope we don't get there, but this is where we're going to end up, for example. Electronic voting, can you recommend a company? We've written some blog posts, and there's multiple companies on there. So you go to readfan.org, electronic voting, and you'll see there's several listed on there. And you know, so you've got a bunch of different options, and that's changing over time. Finding meetings can be held via Zoom or Teams. I would ask your attorney on that. I would say probably that's, you know, it might depend on your docs, but I wouldn't try to continue that on, because I think we're not at most of these things were put in place because of COVID, where you could do Zoom, and you know, because it was an emergency situation. We're not really in that anymore in general. So there's not a state of emergency in the state or the country. So might be trouble there. Can a board member do handyman work for owners? Anybody can do any handyman work for anybody as long as they don't do things that require a permit, don't do unlicensed or unpermitted work. Okay, so we're actually out of time. I'm sorry if I didn't get to all your questions. But feel free to drop me an email. Ashley will send that out and I'll try to answer it. But if you've got real specific ones to your property, sometimes they're hard to answer. But thanks again. I appreciate all of your volunteering and serving your communities. And hopefully, even if you've done this for a long time, you might find something out of these, 7 habits that you hadn't thought about before and consider it moving forward, because I think it really can have a nice impact on your ability to be effective in your community. So thanks again, everybody. If you haven't filled out the poll, please do. And everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. For more great educational content, click the subscribe button now.